My name is Felix Meissner, the past president of the North American Young Generation in Nuclear, NAYGN, and we're an organization that's very proud and excited to be a Nuclear Matters partner. The Nuclear Matters Partner Program works really closely with organizations who also recognize the value of America's nuclear energy plants. Together as a team, we work on efforts to educate the public on the clear benefits of nuclear energy and really to explore possible policy solutions to preserve this essential energy resource here in the United States. Today you'll be hearing questions throughout the Hangout submitted from a lot of our partner organizations. A little bit about NAYGN, the North American Young Generation of Nuclear. We are the premier professional society for young geners, those who are young by age and who feel young at heart, and who work in the nuclear industry or who have a vested interest within the industry. And we're a professional development society, and with a vision to develop leaders to energize the future of nuclear. Public information and public outreach is one of our 5 pillars, and this is a perfect tie-in with Nuclear Matters. We have many efforts and different programs to go out into the public and inform our neighbors, our friends, our family about the benefits of nuclear power and why this really is such an essential resource for the energy production in the country. So on behalf of Nuclear Matters, NAYGN, and all of our campaign partners, I'm happy to welcome you to our second annual Google Hangout titled Why Nuclear Matters to the U.S. Economy. And today we're very lucky to be joined by Dr. Larry Lindsey, who's Nuclear Matters' newest Leadership Council member. Dr. Lindsey currently works at the Lindsey Group. Prior to his current position, he's held positions such as Assistant to the President and Director of the National Economic Council at the White House, and he was the Chief Economic Advisor to candidate George W. Bush during the 2000 presidential campaign. Dr. Lindsey also served as a governor of the Federal Reserve System from 1991 to 1997, as a special assistant to the President for Domestic Economic Policy during the first Bush administration, and as a senior staff economist for tax policy at the Council of Economic Advisors during President Reagan's first term. Thanks so much for joining us today during our Google Hangout, Dr. Lindsey. We're definitely looking forward to hearing your perspective on the value of the existing nuclear fleet to the U.S. economy.
Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be joining you here today. And you know, as a public official, I'm a great believer that facts should be the basis of policy decisions, not spin, not emotion. And I'm very proud of what Nuclear Matters is doing to bring facts before the American public. Great,
excellent. So before we get started into our questions and answer, Dr. Lindsey, why Nuclear Matters and why join? What's your motivation for being on the Leadership Council?
Well, my first motivation is I'm a great believer in using facts, and I like organizations like this for presenting facts. But all my life I've been exposed to the nuclear industry. I grew up near Indian Point on the Hudson River in New York. So I guess even as a child, I sort of naturally accepted the role of nuclear power in America's energy future. I also got sensitized at a young age to how important it can be to the local economy. The town in which Indian Point is located, Buchanan, is you know, it's a working-class town, and the kind of jobs that Indian Point brought to that area. I mean, they pay on average a little over a third more than the standard wage. And moreover, my family were educators, and my uncle happened to be the superintendent of schools in that district, and he was able to provide a real quality education program at a fraction of the cost to the taxpayer because he had those nuclear plants there. You know, today, on average, the nuclear plants, there are about 99 of them in the country, on average are generating $22 million apiece in non-federal revenue, local, state, and local revenue. You know, what town couldn't benefit from 22 million extra in taxes, right? And but I learned that at an early age, and so I've always you know, thought that nuclear power was an important option both for the country but also for the locality in which the plants are operating.
Well, great, thanks. Glad to hear that you have a personal connection and a personal motivation to the nuclear industry. And for those who may not be aware, who might be joining into one of these hangouts for the first time, what exactly is Nuclear Matters, and what is the organization's mission, and what are we trying to accomplish?
Well, Nuclear Matters, as you mentioned in your introduction, is there to provide a set of facts and information to the public at large and to policymakers, because candidly, there's a lot of emotion that surrounds the role of nuclear energy in America's energy future. Of course, in politics you can't divorce yourself from emotion, but sound decision making should be based on facts, and simply providing facts that sometimes people forget about, and sometimes, dare I say it, politicians forget about, I think is a very important part of the process. And that's what Nuclear Matters' primary function is, and I'm a great believer in supporting it, and happy to be part of the Leadership Council.
Great. So I think we were all within the nuclear industry really excited to see some new data from a study that was recently released from the Brattle Group, and I think that's really going to be the focus of our discussion today. And specifically, a question came from one of our partners at the Nuclear Advocacy Network. Try saying that 3 times fast. And their question is, based on the amount of evidence that the report points to. I mean, there's an overwhelming amount that shows support of nuclear energy. What are some of the 1 or 2 key points that you think that we as advocates of the nuclear energy should really emphasize to policymakers? I mean, what's going to help us make our case from that Brattle report?
Well, I think there's 2 areas that are important to focus on, and I would broadly define them as pure economy and also environmental. On the economic side, you really can't imagine the American economy functioning without having at least our current nuclear power base in place. Nuclear power generates 20% of all of our electricity. Total sales of nuclear power plants are about $100 billion. The way economists think about it, it's about $60 billion in terms of value added, meaning that what you sell minus what you pay to others. That's an incredibly large contribution. And it spills over into the environmental piece. Those power plants, for example, provide 63% of all the non-carbon-based power that the country uses. So, we're increasingly concerned about the role of carbon dioxide emissions, and it's very hard to imagine economic growth continuing without having nuclear power involved. The estimates for the use of electricity going forward center around growth of roughly 1% a year, maybe a little bit more. So by 2040, we're going to need 28% more electric generation. Gosh, where is that going to come from? It's very hard to imagine to not have nuclear be part of that mix.
Mm-hmm. And as a follow-up there, Nuclear Liz on Twitter had a question about the amount of direct and indirect jobs that the nuclear industry supports. Can you comment on that total?
Well, nationally, directly and indirectly, the nuclear industry is providing about 475,000 jobs, because not only do you run the power plant, but obviously there's firms that service that power plant. At any one plant, what you're talking about is between 500 and 700 jobs on average. And most important for workers and for the communities in which they live, those jobs provide well above average earnings, more than a third, estimates up to 38% more earnings than is the prevailing wage. So, those are the ultimate good jobs that we have here. And going forward, I think that attracting new workers into that industry is going to be essential. The current workforce in the nuclear industry is, well, given that I am one, why don't we say mature and sophisticated. They're in their 50s typically, and that means that there's going to be a lot of openings for young people and a lot of good jobs coming down the road.
Well, with a fact like that the wages are about a third higher than what's comparable in the area, that should be a relatively easy sell for new folks looking for work.
Oh, absolutely. It's the kind of job in which training is important. These are not jobs for which you need to go get your PhD to do. These are real jobs for real people, and I think that's a very important additional fact.
Great. Yeah, I think that fact of $22 million impact in state taxes per plant, and like you mentioned, personal example of Indian Point. I mean, I think that's an essential fact. The nuclear industry needs to keep talking about it. It needs to get out there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really revolutionizes the situation that local government has, because it's a tremendous asset, tremendous employer with good jobs.
Mm-hmm.
The other fact I pointed out, that it's not just an economic issue; it's an environmental issue with our carbon focus. One of the things we forget about nuclear power is that the carbon savings is not part of the price, not part of the benefits we do in the calculation. So, for example, if the nuclear power were generated the same way we generate other power, that would mean another 573 million metric tons of carbon that are emitted. The EPA values that in terms of social costs about $25 billion. In addition, there are nitrogen oxide and sulfur oxide emissions that also carry a cost that they estimated at roughly $8 billion. So if you put those two together, the nuclear contribution is saving us $33 billion in terms of not having those kind of pollutants be emitted. Let me just do some simple economic math here. Nuclear sales are $100 billion. We have an additional $33 billion that we don't even count in terms of benefits. So every dollar of nuclear energy that's generated actually has a social benefit of $1.33. That's a tremendous savings. It's not reflected in the market price, but it's what economists call an externality, an external value of using nuclear energy.
Yeah.
I know it sounds a little bit wonky, but it's real benefits in terms of avoiding pollution.
Definitely. And that $33 million, that's calculated by the EPA, right? You said not.
Right. It's an EPA. We don't actually have a market for those things. So you can market determined price, but EPA calculates how many in terms of lives saved and morbidity and what have you. They do a sort of a health benefit calculation on this, and those are their numbers. Another way to think about it, the carbon dioxide reduced emissions from nuclear is what you put out with 125 million cars. That's more than half of all the passenger cars in the country. So if you're concerned about carbon emissions, I mean, it's hard to imagine getting to even maintaining current carbon levels, much less reduce carbon levels further, without having nuclear energy be a major provider of electricity in the country.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So we've talked about the benefits on a local and federal tax level. We've talked about the benefits to the GDP. We've talked about the environmental benefits. Why do tariffs matter to the individuals? I mean, as a consumer, how do they affect my wallet? And I mean, do they reduce my energy bills? What kind of benefits are in it? Just for me, just for Felix.
Well, just for on average, they reduce electricity costs by about 6%, which is real money. Let's face it. The, um, the the important thing to remember about that is it's not just your bill; it's reliability of electricity. We all know if we have a blackout, especially if it goes on for for hours and hours. We all know how much of a real cost that is to us. It's pain. Let's face it. And it is economically sensible and beneficial to us as consumers to maintain reliability in the electric generation field. And nuclear is important to that. Nuclear plants have the smallest amount of downtime of any energy generator. They run 24/7. They're an important part of base loads, meaning because they run 24/7, you can use other types of plants to come online or offline depending upon peak loads. But having a nuclear plant there is really an essential part of the general electricity mix and providing reliability as well as providing lower cost. On a short-term basis, nuclear power is almost free. Once you get the plant there, once you get the employees there, the cost of the fuel, the rods are already in place. So the cost of running the plant in a very short-term basis are very low, and that's one advantage of making sure that when you have a plant in place, that you want to keep it running. And energy costs, as we all know, go up and down. I remember 3 energy shocks and 3 energy gluts in my life. You're a younger man, so maybe you've only been through one of them. But you don't want. Right now, we have a world in which energy happens to be quite cheap. But remember, a year ago, oil was selling closer to $100 a barrel, and now it's 40. Well, I got bad news for you. At some point, it's going to go back up to 100, right? That's just the nature of the industry. So when you have a long-run energy provider like nuclear, you don't want to make long-run decisions based on short-run variables. So the fact that oil is now cheap or natural gas is now cheap should not be the driver of our long-run energy policy. Having a long-term reliable supplier of energy like nuclear, I think, is an important part of the mix. We call it diversification in economics. It's an essential thing to keep in mind when you're designing our energy future.
So is it fair to say that the role that nuclear plays in the diversification of our energy mix helps prevent us from having future energy spikes, or kind of will help mitigate those?
Oh, absolutely. Think of geopolitics, for example. The world is not a safe place, and 2 of the energy shocks in my lifetime came out of result of events in the Middle East. If there were to be another one, and we were 100% dependent on, say, oil and natural gas, the cost of energy would spike tremendously. I remember in the first energy spike we had, the price of oil went up by a factor of 10-fold. Gasoline went from 30 cents a gallon to over $1 a gallon. If you expose your economy to that kind of shock, this was the dawn of time. We were using stone chisels back then, but it was the early 1973. So the equivalent today, with gas around, say, $3, It would be like gas going from $3 to $10. Imagine what $10 gasoline would do to our economy right now. So, the less you can be exposed to that kind of risk, the better off you are. And having a nuclear, which is reliable and running 24/7, is an important way of lowering our economic and geopolitical risk.
Sure. So with all those benefits, why are the existing plants facing challenges here in the States now? What's contributing to us having this dialogue and having to get the great word out about nuclear?
Well, there are a bunch of issues. The first one, I think, is largely emotional. It's a safety-related issue, and it is a simple fact. It's not a pleasant fact. There is no completely risk-free, cost-free form of energy generation. In the old days when we started the fire, hang around the fire, there's risk in running a fire, right? There's risk no matter how you generate electricity. What we have to do is mitigate those risks, and a tremendous amount of effort has been put in since the Japanese earthquake and tsunami to have backup generation in order to make nuclear plants safer. As in all fields, we're learning. So I think that's one area of which to address. The second is more of a short-termism problem in policy. Because at the moment, oil and natural gas are cheap, all of a sudden the economic advantages of having a cheap source of energy in the form of nuclear are reduced. And so we say, oh gosh, with oil and gas so cheap, maybe we can just go that way. And we tend to be rather short-term focused and forget about the long-term issues here. Nuclear fuel is cheap. Having the skilled workforce to run the nuclear plant is something that is not quite as cheap, and you need to be able to have sort of an intermediate term coverage of those costs. And you also have to be concerned about the capital cost issue. So different types of power have different cost structures, and that by itself is a reason to diversify, because you want some with low short-term costs, higher long-term costs, and some with low long-term costs and higher short-term costs, so that you can always optimize your mix in a way that is of maximum benefit. And right now we're sort of in kind of a perfect storm, where we have very, very temporarily cheap alternatives to nuclear, and so the economic challenge on nuclear plants is quite high. You may have noticed I've been in and out of government most of my life. Politicians aren't great at thinking long term, at least beyond the next election. And I think one of the things we have to do at Nuclear Matters is constantly say, hey guys, there's life after the next election, and let's start focusing on long-term issues and not just short-term issues.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about politics for a minute in terms of what's going on in D.C. Right now, when we're talking nuclear energy, a lot of people are talking about it in relation to the Clean Power Plan. Could you explain what's going on there? And specifically, one of our partners, the U.S. Women in Nuclear, want to know how you think the Clean Power Plan will affect the economic challenges that our current fleet is facing.
We're going to see how all of this sorts out at the level of detail. Mm-hmm. I think it's important, though, to just remember the basic facts. There is no way we are going to meet any kind of carbon goal, even maintaining the current level, without nuclear power maintaining a role in that. Again, nuclear is 63% of all the non-carbon generated electricity in the country. Most of the rest of that is hydro, and the capacity for expanding hydro is very, very limited. So nuclear is an essential part of the non-carbon based energy generation. How you could, the mind boggles as to how you could possibly even maintain the current level of carbon without, and somehow not have nuclear, which is reducing carbon emissions from electricity by 23%. I mean, that's just a huge number. It's roughly the equivalent to what the Clean Power Plan is talking about as a long-run reduction in carbon emissions. So if you add that long-run reduction, and on top of that, you sort of double it by saying, oh, and you can't use nuclear to get there. It just doesn't add up. And I think that that is the essential element of carbon. We couldn't maintain the current level of carbon emissions, and we certainly couldn't reduce the current level of carbon emissions without having the nuclear industry. Excuse me just a sec.
Yeah, I mean, what a valid point, and I'm sure the people who are studying the Clean Power Plan, and when they crunch the numbers, are probably starting to realize the same thing that you and I just talked about, is that nuclear is essential and it's vital and it's a must-do. You can't do it without the existing fleet.
Right, and remember, you don't have to be a supporter of the plan to realize that nuclear is still essential. Again, I want to stress this. It's essential to have nuclear even to maintain the current level of carbon emissions, much less reduce them going forward. Mm-hmm. There's a little good news here. We have 5 new nuclear plants now under construction. Mm-hmm. 2 in Georgia, 2 in South Carolina, 1 in Tennessee. So some of the incremental energy needs of the country are hopefully going to be met by nuclear. It isn't that we have a complete moratorium going on. But maybe we step back and let's add up everything we talked about. The Energy Department says we need 28% more electric power generation.
By 2040.
By 2040. Think of it as 1% a year. We're going to have to add 1% a year in power generation. At the same time, we're trying to cut carbon emissions by roughly 1% a year. How are you going to make up that 2% without having a carbon-free generator of electricity involved? It's kind of a 1 and 1 has to add up to 2. You got to fill the 2 somehow, and it's actually quite as simple as that. Although sometimes addition's not a strong suit in Washington. That's why we have a huge budget deficit, by the way.
That's right. That's right. All right. Well, we're coming up to the end of our half-hour hangout here, and I just wanted to sneak in one final question. This is from our partner at the Center for Nuclear Technology Awareness, and they appropriately asked, what are your suggestions for partners, local groups, individuals, anyone who's a nuclear advocate? What can we do to spread the word at the local level and get involved within nuclear matters?
Well, first of all, I've been having Nuclear Matters there as a national source, I think, is very important, and partnering with Nuclear Matters is important. But it also involves going to your local community leaders, and this isn't just the politicians. It's various local groups, the civic groups like the Rotaries. It could be church groups, whatever, and people are very, very concerned with the direction of the country right now, and energy is an important part of that. And just making yourself available to civic groups and just to get the facts out. You don't even have to be a particular advocate. In my opinion, if you just put the facts out, the story sells itself. Mm-hmm. Because, as I mentioned before, it's a matter of addition. there aren't a lot of alternatives out there. There aren't any alternatives out there. And if you want to have the economy grow, if you want to have your community grow, it's really essential that we have a nuclear industry, a vibrant nuclear industry. And and I think when you just express the basic numbers, the basic facts, it's an easy story to convey.
Definitely, yeah. The numbers don't lie. Well, Dr. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining us for a Google Hangout. As always, and anybody who's listening, feel free to follow the Nuclear Matters campaign on Twitter and Facebook. Sign up on the website for updates. Sign up for the e-newsletter, and make sure to share the content that hits home to you and that you want to share with your friends and colleagues. And Nuclear Matters is always looking for more partners, more supporters. There's contact info on the website, info@nuclearmatters.com, if your group is interested in becoming a partner and joining the campaign. Dr. Lindsey, thanks so much again for bringing your economic wisdom to the table, for keeping us talking about the facts, taking the emotion out of the discussion, and making it a sensible case for nuclear. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks, Felix.